Hello and welcome to In the Light, Growing Your Soul with me, Anna Isabel. And my guest today is Elizabeth Ashley. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hello, Anna. So lovely to meet you.
And your book is most unusual. And I just, well, being an astrologer, I am very connected with mythology and with the ancient world. So I guess I'd best stop teasing the audience and tell them the title of your book, which is Meeting the Melissae. Um, so, who are these mysterious people?
Well, that's a brilliant question, and one that plagued me for about 2.5 years. The book took around 4 years to write, and I'd originally begun. I'm an aromatherapist by trade, and I was researching lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, and in a very ancient herbal, I found a mention that the Melissae were the ancient Greek priestesses of the goddess Demeter. And you know how sometimes something just tingles at the back of your head and goes, that's something, and I don't know what it is, but I I don't know whether I remember it but every part of my being was like, no, no, I just can't leave that. I need to find out who they were, and I was able to find that they were bee shamans. The word Melissa means bee, and these were can be found in lots of places in Greek mythology and in Greek history of these women who worshipped the bee and who were nymphs who were also sometimes bees. And you can see them lots of gold artifacts of these women who have women's bodies and bees' heads and feet and hands, and yeah, mentioned lots and lots of times. And they were the priestesses, I found, who presided over the Eleusinian mysteries, which were the biggest. It was the biggest initiation of the ancient world. It went on for around about 2000 years, and so as long as Christianity has endured, these were the priestesses who ran it. They were a big deal.
So, you mentioned Demeter. And so, for people who are unaware of who Demeter is, could you explain that?
Yeah, so she has, like many Greek goddesses, she has many aspects. So I suppose the most salient point, given that these priestesses were called bees, is that she is the goddess of the harvest. The in the Romans called her Ceres, as in cereal. So she's very connected to grain and barley in particular. And the Greeks said it was her that gave the secrets of agriculture to humankind in in thanks to one a royal family's kindness to her when she was searching for her daughter Persephone. She was called the Kore as a child, who had been abducted down into Hades' realm underworld. And the royal family had found her grieving by the well in the city of Eleusis. And it's a very long and convoluted myth. But yeah, so she um, thanked them for their kindness to her by giving these secrets. So she's also the mythological great mother because of her search for Persephone, um, but also fertility generally. And she has many epithets. For example, Demeter the Green. So not only is she harvest, she's the changing of the colours of the seasons. She's a huge, very ancient goddess, and you can find her in even in Crete, well before even the golden age of Greek myths. Very, very ancient. And so the Eleusinian mysteries were, we think they were probably made to explain the ritual, or the myth was probably told to explain the ritual that was already happening around about 5000 BC. So very ancient.
Yes, indeed. She is, I guess we could say, the goddess of nature, and she's always portrayed holding wheat as well. So there's that thing about the harvest. So they and they were priestesses that were dedicated to Demeter, and they, but they were specifically linked with bees. Have you been able to work out the importance of the bee in ancient cultures?
So the priestesses were priestesses specifically of Demeter core. So that's Demeter and her daughter Persephone. But also there were Melissae who served some Aphrodite in some places. So specifically at Eryx, they served Aphrodite, and also Artemis of Ephesus. And each cult, you see a slightly different aspect of the bees. So the ancients believed that the bees were bringers of dreams, but also that they escorted the souls of the dead and brought in the new souls. So if you imagine that Demeter is the mother goddess, so she is giving birth to new souls, but also Persephone takes away the souls of the dead. Um, in the case of Aphrodite, her priestesses were sexual priestesses, and it seems like they are emulating the hypersexual queen, how the virgin princess bee is chased by all of these males and has to have male sex with many, many, many of them before she goes down into the hive, and then doesn't see light of day again. She's just in service to the hive. So with that, it's like the bee is the bringer of sweetness and honey, but it is through sexuality. um Artemis of Ephesus, everything about that temple was devoted to the bee. So Ephesus, um according to some sources, even means the city of the bees, and that the head priestess there was called the beekeeper. The priests there were eunuchs, and they were known as drones or Essenes, which is the name of a male bee. And male bees, once they've copulated with the queen, lose their phallus, so they become eunuchs. So there's clearly that emulation there. Um, but when you look at the stories of Artemis, the other Artemis, maybe the one with the bow and arrow, how she's a solitary goddess and how she's a leaf cutter, there's quite a lot of parallels with solitary bees, rather than honeybees, how they go off on their own, how they are there's leaf cutter bees, mason bees, there's huge amounts of building at Ephesus, minor bees, it was a quarrying city. So it's very clever, but the overarching thing is that the idea of the polis, which is the city state, and the democracy was based on the idea that um, of how a bee hive worked, that everybody worked together, everyone had their own jobs, and they worked for the good of the goddess.
Just coming back to the Demeter side of things, I it suddenly makes a lot of sense because if they regard bees as being responsible for bringing dreams, they paid a lot of attention to dreams, and there were the mysteries and the healing temples where people would go to dream as part of their healing. So that now makes sense as to why the bee would be considered so important if it's bringing dreams, and also the idea of bringing in life and taking the souls into the underworld. I think that's fascinating. These are not associations that we would think about with bees. Somehow the link with Aphrodite would seem more obvious because of the sweetness and the idea of fertility. So that's very interesting. Artemis, the link with Artemis is also interesting because she was a goddess of nature too. She was considered to be a very kind of wild goddess. She had no relations with men. She didn't want to have children. She didn't want to be married. She absolutely did hunt and was very linked with women and women's concerns, particularly childbirth, etc. So it's almost as though they're covering with the bees and looking at how what bees do and looking at all different aspects of femininity or feminine energy and translating it through the bee.
Exactly. And actually, I wish I'd kind of written down all of the things that you've said there about Artemis because you picked up so many threads. So the first is that you're right that she is a virgin goddess, she's chaste. So if you think about what happens in the hive, only the queen bee is mated. All of the others are chaste, and yet they are able to give birth. So they are capable of parthenogenic birth. So they are mothers, but only to sons. My favourite of all of the things that I picked out in the parallels with Artemis, which I enjoyed the Artemis myths and the parallels far more than the others, I have to say, was that drone bees, male bees, don't have the same mandibles, the same like teeth to be able to chew themselves out of the eggs. So the females have to give birth, have to help the males to be born. Well, if you know anything about the Artemis myth, I can see it on your face that you know what I'm going to say. Artemis famously helped her brother be born. And that is exactly what happens in the hive. The drones need to be dragged out and helped out of their cells by the females, where the females give birth to themselves very easily. And also just the whole, I mean, she's not a very studied goddess, is she, Artemis? You know, we know a lot more about people like goddesses like Athena, but when you do look at Artemis, she's a vengeful goddess. You know, you do not cross her because she does terrible things to people, like if you annoy a bee. You know, if you slight a bee, it's going to sting you. It'll put a pheromone out that tells everybody else, get this one. And they do, you know, when you're in the hive and if you put your hand on one, you need to get that sting out immediately, which is like an arrow, incidentally. Get that sting out immediately, or they're all coming after you, just like what happens with the nymphs and Artemis's orders to the nymphs.
Now that's behavior that I was aware that wasps engage in. I wasn't aware that bees do the same thing. Were they looking at wasps at all, or was it specifically the bee that they were connected with?
Well, I can only answer that from an instinctive point of view. I found that there were loads of different threads that went off to different insects. And the more I learned about insects, the more I was thinking, oh, that's so funny. That was my favourite thing about the whole project. I was like, that's so funny. That really reminds me of that myth. But I couldn't find wasps. But interestingly, um, the we don't know what happened in the Eleusinian mysteries because it was bound by secrecy with a death vow. If you exposed it, it was on fear of death. Now it was parodied in a very famous play by a playwright called Aristophanes, and he has a play called Wasps.
He does, doesn't he? I'd forgotten that. But yes,
He does.
and yes, he seemed to have license to say things that nobody else did.
Absolutely right. And when you read Wasps, there are a few things that jump out Like when I was learning how to do some of they do a specific meditation the priestesses do, where they walk in the figure of eight like the bees do. And there are a couple of places where they're talking about characters walking round in a circle and coming back the same way and working, and it's describing the figure of eight. Yeah.
Oh, it's been a while since I've thought about Aristophanes. But yes, and his comedies. Um, just coming back now to these rituals, as you say, we're not very aware of the rituals. Um, but did you get any sense of what the purpose of what they were doing was? Was it something to was it in any way to um, link with bees, to communicate with bees? Was there any element of that that was going on?
If it was, that that is completely occult. We know that from things that people have written, um, there's been letters found between people who, for example, if I remember rightly, Plutarch wrote a letter to his wife after their child died, and he mentioned it. We know that the objective was to have a better experience of this life and after death. Um, but other than that, my experience of it, of going through all of the studies and all of the work with other priestesses who were doing bee work, was that I had a tremendous joy of nature. You know, I was able to see things that I just didn't see before. And so I do think that I have a better experience of life for going through it. But whether they were doing things with bees is difficult to see.
Tell us about your experiences with nature, where you said that you could see things that you couldn't see before.
Well, just staring into the hive, to be honest with you. I started to really, well, I should put it into context that the period that I'm talking about writing was lockdown, and I was homeschooling a 10-year-old, and we had no set texts at the beginning. And so we were just going out looking for things. And so we were always looking for, well, what might that myth be talking about? And we became fascinated by the river in particular and how the river changed. And I can remember a really lovely story, a lovely episode where I'd said, "My goodness me, it had rained and rained and rained." In fact, I think if I remember rightly, it was just before President Biden was inaugurated, and it had rained for days, and the river was churned up and red and full. And I said, "Goodness me, the goddess in all her glory." And my son went, "Wait, what?" I said, "Well, she is glorious." And he went, "The river's a female? I definitely thought it was a river god." And I was like, "Well, yes, there are river gods." And so that was really quite enlightening that he'd seen something completely different to me. And then we were thinking about all of the ways that there's these many different priestesses who were able to birth themselves, goddesses who were able to birth themselves. And particularly, we were interested in one nymph who Persephone had become very annoyed with. Her name was Minte, and we were fascinated by the fact that mint does, in fact, birth itself. So we just started watching things in a very different way, and certainly bees in particular. We got beehives, but we had this huge influx of every kind of bumblebee you can imagine, and they were just landing on us all of the time. And so just to be, it was almost, there was one occasion where a drone sat on my arm, and he was just sitting watching me, and I had the distinct impression that he would go away and talk about me. So there's a book called uh, Songs of Unity by a lady called Jacqueline Freeman. And she talks about the drones, and she has a very deep relationship with the bees, and she can hear the bees speaking to her, whereas I could hear priestesses, she could hear bees. And the drones, the workers had told her that or she calls them sisters, sorry, the sisters had told her that the drone's job was to go out into the world, and then they would come into the hive, and they would be allowed to go in without having any pollen. Everybody would stand aside so they could go to the nymphs, and they would walk around the nymphs, and they would sing their songs of all the news and the ancestry to the babies while they were hatching. So it was fascinating to have this drone sit on me and really was like peering at me and looking at me. And then when I got my own hive, I noticed that they were absolutely what she'd heard of these bees was absolutely correct. So the sister bees have to wait their turn to go into the entrance, and they have to be carrying pollen or they're not allowed in. But the drones don't collect pollen, they just go straight in. And if you look on the frames, there they are. They're wandering over the top of all the larvae. And they are humming a different song. And it's like these are, sorry, her book is called Songs of Increase, not Unity, sorry. And yeah, so just being able to observe all of these things, I wouldn't have noticed otherwise, you know.
What I love about what you're describing is that it seems to me that by allowing yourself to explore a part of our history and a part of our mythology that comes from a time when people were extremely connected with nature, you have yourself found the path back to that connection.
Definitely, and I wouldn't say this was to do with bees. This is more to do with Melissa essential oil. But I was so connected to that time. I was dreaming it and meditating it and all manner of things. And it became like I could walk through time. That I could just go backwards and forwards to different places in the Acropolis. I'd studied so many like blueprints and so many historical documents that it felt like I could just walk back through time to the place and be able to picture it in my mind. And that was an extraordinary thing. I don't think that now, because I'm not doing it all the time, I kind of almost miss it because it's gone. But it was as if, I could have told you what it was like 2000 years ago without, just like that. And that was a massive gift. Yeah.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I am a tremendous fan of lemon balm, um, which has seeded itself all over my patio garden, despite not having any soil in which to do so. And it is not only does it smell wonderful, quite rightly, the bees love it. And it is, I think, Culpeper, talked about it as being the plant for all ills, it seems, because it was soothing and it doesn't do any harm whatsoever. So it seems to me fitting. When I discovered that the name Melissa actually meant bee, I thought, now that's very interesting. It made complete sense to me.
So the interesting thing that I found, and you're quite right, it does grow like a thug. And actually, the bee medicine is like that. It's like, well, I've an interesting thing is now I've moved on from Melissa and I'm studying myrrh. And myrrh's very much like, oh, you've got a lot going on right now. Oh, that's nice. You've turned up to do some work. Well, that's good. We'll do that. Whereas Melissa was like, you will stay under the thumb until I've done it. And it would not let me come up, and it was not great, if I'm honest. Um, but I spent a lot of time sitting with the lemon balm plant, and you're quite right. Bees do love it, but only bumblebees, honeybees couldn't give a toss. They like the mint and they like the hyssop. I thought that's really fascinating. So, where did the association come from? So, for a lot of the time, that's what I was looking for. Well, where is it? Are they using it in a ritual? But there was no clues to that whatsoever. But we do know from Virgil that they did know then that if you rub a lemon balm plant on the inside of a beehive, it will stop your bees from absconding because it smells the same as their pheromone, which is Nasinoff, which they secrete to keep the colony calm. And it's phenomenal that they worked that out years before. But if you look at it um, like microscopically and you break it down into chemical constituents, the Melissa essential oil is almost identical in chemical components to lemon balm essential oil, to Melissa essential oil, and to Nasinoff, which is their pheromone. Yeah,
Wow.
I
Now
know,
that's a hot tip for
I
anyone with
know. Yeah. So actually, but actually, that was the strange thing, because I was searching and searching. As I said, I was searching for about 2.5 years. But then, as soon as I got involved in beekeeping, every beekeeper knew it. And I was like, how does nobody in aromatherapy know this? And every beekeeper knew it. And it was just not written anywhere.
So I want to take you back to when you were talking about, you know, Melissa making you work, the lemon balm making you work. What did you mean by that? What were you doing? Are you using it like a sacred oil and meditating with it? Is that what you were doing?
So, remembering that my job first and foremost is an essential oil researcher. So what I tend to do is to try not to have many other friends with essential oils. There are times in life when that's impossible, but it was okay at that time. So I was drinking the tea because all of the evidence shows anti-obesity, anti-diabetic, so drinking the tea. I was using the essential oil, I was using the CO2, I was meditating, doing bee shamanism meditations, and I was also doing training to be a dream priestess, like you were talking about earlier. So I am a trained dream priestess, but I had enrolled on a course and I'd looked at the time and thought, oh, 1:30, that's absolutely perfect. I can do my work and then just in time for my son coming home. And then I realized, no, that's 1:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. So I was getting up at 12 o'clock to be ready online for a dream course as well. So I was so tired, really tired, and not sleeping because I was doing all this dream work, but also getting up and writing down everything that I was doing. So it wasn't great, really, if I'm honest. And bear in mind that I was also doing homeschooling as well as that. And I had a daughter who's a paramedic on the front lines. So it was a really difficult time, but I just was determined I was going to do it. And my pen name, so you introduced me as Elizabeth Ashley, which is correct, but I write under the name The Secret Healer. And so to give somebody a ritual to write about, which is all about secrets, I had these kind of dilemmas all of the time. Do I want to write that down? Do I not want to write that down? Do I want to reveal that? Or what goes in, what doesn't go in? And so that was very difficult. And it wasn't just like, it was like deep, deep conflict within myself. What do I reveal? What do I not reveal?
Tell us about bee shamanism.
Well, I guess you very much hit the nail on the head when you were talking about Artemis, really. The bee shamanism looks at as many things as possible about a bee and seeks to learn things about yourself through that. So in the in our case now, that would be normal everyday things. How would I address normal everyday things? But when you're looking at it from a priestess point of view, they become much more extreme. So, for example, it said that uh, a bee mistress is able to control whether the sperm meets the egg. When we talk about how those the queen bee, when she lays a drone, it's an unfertilized egg. When she lays a sister or a worker bee, she chooses based on the size of the hole that it's going into, whether it's a fertilized egg. So she's choosing. So could the bee priestess have chosen? It's always looking at that kind of thing. And bear in mind that we've talked about how it's a virgin that always gives birth to a son. So that has echoed through many other incarnations and become very famous in other stories too. Um, so it's very much about, well, another famous bee priestess was the Oracle of Delphi. She was called Melissa Delphis, the Delphic bee, and her motto was Know Thyself. So it's always about looking at reflections and trying to peel away more and more layers, imagining that you are a nymph. So we talk about the nymphs in the Greek mythology, but a nymph is also an unhatched bee. It's a little worm that will go into a cocoon and come out changed with wings. And so bee shamanism was always working towards trying to achieve that blossoming. And of course, using bees as your totems too, you know, bringers of dreams, but also for many other different, you know, just as you would use any totem animal, you can instruct and ask, although, yeah, you don't instruct a bee, you ask very nicely a bee. They know how to put you in your place, that's for sure. But yeah, they are my totems.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful insight into bees. And I must just confess that the timing of this is quite something because having just started a community gardening project, one of the things that we are planning to do is have a beehive. So the synchronicity has not escaped me that I should be reading about this at this time. Thank you so very much, Elizabeth, for your time. And once again, to everyone, a reminder that the book we are discussing is Meeting the Melissae, and I will be putting a link to that in the description box. If people want to find you and learn more about what you do, Elizabeth, how do they do that?
The best way is to go to my link tree. So if you search http:// link tree and then / the secret healer or thesecrethealer.co.uk, you can find me easily.
I'll be putting a link to that um, in the description box. Thank you so much once again, Melissa.
Thank you. You'd be amazed how many times that happens in a day. Try
Thank you
again.
so much, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me, Anna, and thank you everyone for listening, and hopefully you will do your bit to support the bees.
Indeed. And thank you all for watching. Until next time, goodbye.